color of an ancient salt lake in northern Chinese province of Shanxi turns red at this season every year. Local officials say the famous tourist destination changes color due to the existence of an algae in the lake. Scientists say the lake turns red only when the number of the algae reaches thousands in a drop of water. Scientists say the salt lake was formed about 500 million years ago. It's the world's third largest sodium sulfate inland lake, from which locals have been extracting salt crystals for more than 4,000 years.
Based on our experience, the lake turns red only when the number of specific algae in the lake reaches tens of thousands. The samples we got from the water near the bank show that under the microscope, the number of the algae has reached about 2,000 or 3,000 in a drop of water.
Because of the water's high salinity, people can also float on the lake's surface. That's why it has earned the title China's Dead Sea.
This is AP News Minute. President Obama and leaders from around the world gathered in Jerusalem Friday for the funeral of former Israeli President and Prime Minister Shimon Peres. The 93-year-old Peres died on Wednesday. He was a co-winner of the 1994 Nobel Peace Prize for his role in Israeli-Palestinian peace talks. Federal investigators are trying to figure out why a commuter train crashed through a station in Hoboken, New Jersey Thursday, killing a young mother and injuring more than 100 people. Questions could focus on the train's speed and whether a system to automatically slow or stop trains would have helped if it had been installed on that line. Some people in Iowa are already casting their votes for president. Early in-person voting began in Iowa on Thursday. 8 taco trucks in Houston are registering people to vote. A local communications executive got the idea after one of Donald Trump's supporters said that if the U.S. didn't stop illegal immigration, there would be taco trucks on every corner. Diane Kepley, The Associated Press, with AP News Minute.
Each day, more than 1.5 million people commute into Manhattan in a complex choreography that moves before the sun. But this morning, a New Jersey transit train that should have been crawling into its final stop instead bolted through a barrier and rammed into the waiting area of Hoboken Terminal, collapsing part of the century-old building. Only one person was killed, but 108 others, including the engineer, were injured. Jim Axelrod is in Hoboken, just across the Hudson from Manhattan.
It was the height of rush hour this morning. In a station 15,000 commuters pass through each day. When, at 8:45, chaos engulfed the New Jersey Transit Terminal in Hoboken. This is what train number 1614, stuffed with commuters, looked like as it approached. Eyewitnesses say it was moving at a high rate of speed when it failed to stop. As it entered the station, it continued beyond the tracks, sending the 4 cars crashing through a main concourse barrier, then launching airborne into the platform area. Inside the train, passengers like Kirby Fisher could not believe what was happening.
It was like a big crash, and then everything from the ceiling fell in.
Jamie Weatherhead Saul was in the first car.
Like, there wasn't even a screeching, like it was halting. It just kept going. The lights went off, and people started screaming, and it was like completely thrown from one area to the next. But because it was so crowded, there wasn't much where to go.
30 feet away, Michael Larson, a New Jersey Transit employee, was standing on the platform.
It was just initially just a horrendous exploding noise and concrete dust, electrical wires, and the train flying into the depot.
The one person killed, a woman from Hoboken, was not a passenger on the train, but was standing on the platform when she was hit by debris. New York's Governor Andrew Cuomo.
We know what happened. We don't know why it happened. The train obviously came in at too high a rate of speed. It didn't stop. It went through the barriers. When you see the destruction up close, the silver lining is that there's only been one fatality thus far.
Others, like engineer William Blaine, looking for something hopeful amidst all the trauma, jumped in to help.
Kaboom! The whole place shook. just shook, and everybody got quiet. When I turned and I ran out and I slid, I looked to the right, and I just saw people all over the ground and debris and everything all over the place. And it's like we were a family. When you say Americans, man, I'm not lying. Everybody of Creed color ran to try to help.
That engineer who survived the crash, his name is Thomas Gallagher. He's 48 years old. He was taken to the hospital, but was later released. And tonight, Scott, we're told Mr. Gallagher is indeed cooperating with investigators.
Jim Axelrod at the scene of the crash tonight. Jim, thank you.
Now for more on the story, we're joined out of Washington by Mr. Brian Becker of the Answer Coalition. Hello, Mr. Becker, and thanks for joining us here on Press TV's Top 5. Now, Mr. Becker, we're witnessing this rapid escalation of tensions between Russia and the United States. Now, both sides have had pretty harsh words for one another and accusations, and all this on the heels of what seemed to be like a trust-building phase to improve ties and try to coordinate operations to go after terrorists just a couple weeks ago. Your read on all this?
The most important thing to understand about why this ceasefire has collapsed, why there will be no ongoing effort internationally to have a peaceful resolution of the Syria crisis, is the fact that the Pentagon, the Secretary of Defense, Ash Carter, and the top uniformed officers in the Pentagon opposed the ceasefire. They openly opposed it. That's not speculation. They openly opposed it in the U.S. media. President Obama gave a go-ahead to John Kerry's last-ditch effort to have a resolution with the Russians. Then the Pentagon announced that they opposed it. And then immediately the Pentagon, the U.S. Air Force, bombed the Syrian Arab Army. Not al-Qaeda, not al-Nusra, not the Army of Conquest, not ISIS. They bombed the Syrian Arab Army, killing 62 people. It was a deliberate effort to sabotage and cancel the ceasefire. They got what they wanted. They don't want a ceasefire.
And this accusation of Russia accusing Washington of having a, quote, non-constructive stance on Syria. What can you add to, and what do you feel that's in reference to, aside from what you just mentioned?
Well, I think the Russian position is somewhat mild in terms of characterizing what the Pentagon is saying. And the State Department. John Kirby, who's an admiral but the spokesperson for the U.S. State Department, a civilian branch of the executive government, said that unless the Russians stop doing what they're doing, which is to support the Syrian Arab Army, extremism would grow, terrorist attacks against Russian troops would grow, Russians would come back to Russia in body bags, Russian cities would be attacked. In other words, these are veiled and not very thinly veiled references to direct threats against Russia. Now, the Russian government perceived it as that. They perceived this as an escalation by the Pentagon and the State Department, canceling the resolution efforts in Syria, but also directly militarily threatening Russia. If Russia ever talked like that about the United States, Americans would come back in body bags, or American cities would be now attacked if America continued its own policy. The U.S. would consider that to be a virtual act of war. But that's what Washington is saying right now about Russia. This is a war of words. Why is it happening? I think it's a precursor to a bigger confrontation.
And Mr. Becker, it just seemed like a couple weeks ago there was some hope when these two powers, teamed up for marathon talks, and they led to that so-called ceasefire attempt. And now we're back in a hopeless state, it seems like, which we have been for the most part the last 5 years, going on 6. What's it going to take now to inject some more hope again into this algorithm?
I think there's no hope right now because the United States American policy position is to sabotage the peace agreement, the peace talks, the peace efforts that was done by the Pentagon. This was Obama's last effort. He's leaving office in January 2017. His likely successor is Hillary Clinton. She's actually calling for an escalation and an expansion of the war. She has all the neoconservatives with her. I believe that there's going to be a wider U.S. military intervention in Syria. They've adopted the old Donald Rumsfeld thesis that if you can't solve a problem, expand it. I think what the United States is preparing to do, the real plan, is to expand the war in Syria. Of course, the Syrian people want the war to end. 500,000 have died. Millions have been made into refugees. They've been the victims of being a pawn in somebody else's geostrategic chessboard. But the American government now, I believe, will be determined. The Pentagon is determined to widen the war, because they really ultimately want Assad to go. They want the government in Syria to fall. That's still the real objective, and that explains why they could never really come to terms with the Syrian government to carry out a concerted effort against the terrorists, and they couldn't do that either with the Russian government.
So you're predicting some rougher days ahead as well. Thank you, Mr. Brian Becker, for your input from the Answer Coalition, joining us out of Washington.